and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The U.S. Federal Reserve lowered its key interest rate by a quarter percentage point for the first time this year and signaled more cuts to come. Fed Chair Jerome Powell pointed to growing signs of weakness in the labor market amid concerns over inflation driven by tariffs. Top diplomats from South Korea and China met in Beijing and discussed North Korea issues, as well as a potential visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping for the APEC leaders meeting next month. Seoul's foreign minister later told reporters he felt it was clear that President Xi intends to visit South Korea. The annual Busan International Film Festival is now underway. Big-name directors and actors hit the red carpet, including Lee Byung-won from the festival's opening film No Other Choice, and Maggie Kang, the director of K-pop Demon Hunters. We begin this morning with the U.S. Central Bank's decision to cut its key interest rate by a quarter percentage point, the first cut of President Trump's second administration. Our Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
U.S. Federal Reserve has cut its benchmark rate by 0.25 percentage points. With the cut, the rate now stands between 4% and 4.25%. The decision on Wednesday local time marks the first rate cut for this year and the first since the Trump administration took office in January, as the Fed had held the rate steady since last December's cut. Speaking to journalists, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the balance of risks has shifted as the downside risk of unemployment has increased.
While the unemployment rate remains low, it has edged up. Job gains have slowed, and downside risks to employment have risen. At the same time, inflation has risen recently and remains somewhat elevated.
In a press release, the central bank also mentioned a somewhat elevated inflation risk due to tariffs, though Powell said the effects of the tariffs on economic activity and inflation are yet to be seen.
Higher tariffs have begun to push up prices in some categories of goods, but their overall effects on economic activity and inflation remain to be seen. A reasonable base case is that the effects on inflation will be relatively short-lived.
One of the Fed governors, Stephen Myron, who was appointed by President Trump and only took office the day before the decision, actually voted for a bigger interest rate cut of 0.5 percentage points. According to the Fed's latest dot plot, which shows policymakers' interest rate projections, there could be 2 additional rate cuts this year in upcoming FOMC meetings in October and December. As a result of this September rate cut, the interest rate differential between Seoul and Washington has narrowed to 1.75 percentage points, with South Korea's rate being at 2.5%. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
So, as widely expected, the U.S. Federal Reserve has now cut its key interest rate for the first cut this year and under the second Trump administration. For more on this, we're joined today by Dr. Greg Bushak, Professor of Finance at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Dr. Bushak, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So the Fed had been facing economic uncertainty and political pressure ahead of today's decision. What's behind this move, and what does the rate cut say about the current state of the U.S. economy and the labor market?
Sure. So the Fed lowered rates by 25 basis points. Generally, the Fed is trying to fulfill its dual mandate in setting rates, which is sort of balancing full employment versus price stability. Lowering rates tends to accelerate the economy, which tends to increase job growth and employment, but it can also lead to inflation, and the Fed is sort of trying to balance these concerns. So what does it look like in the economy? The employment situation is not great. The latest jobs picture showed approximately no new hiring, slightly higher unemployment rate, and additionally some data revisions from earlier in the year paint a much more pessimistic picture than many had anticipated. Unfortunately, at the same time, inflation hasn't quite come down to that magic 2% level that the Fed would like to see, but sort of given that the fact that the Fed lowered rates does suggest that concerns over the labor market kind of won out, and that was broadly in line with expectations. Now, sort of a big theme lately has been political pressure on the Fed. Typically, the elected branches of government want the Fed to lower rates, so that kind of increases economic growth. And in particular, Trump has really been pressuring Powell to lower rates. And notably, as came up in the report, one of the dissenters in today's decision was a brand new Trump appointee to the Fed board who wanted to lower rates by even more than 25 basis points. Now, like the Fed, Powell in particular, they're extremely sensitive about not wanting to give in to political pressure from the executive branch. History shows that when a central bank loses political independence, very bad things like hyperinflation tend to follow, which paradoxically can increase rates at the long end of the curve, which matters for government borrowing and even for households who would like to get a mortgage. Now, Powell has done a good job so far in holding the line, but there is some concern down the road that as more Trump appointees kind of roll onto the FOMC, there could be some loss of independence.
I see. And rates are now at their lowest point since November 2022. And the Fed said it would cut rates twice more this year. What economic impact will this have on the global economy?
So I really think of kind of three main things. First, the US is just a very large economy. So to the extent that this does spur more economic activity, more spending, more investing from Americans, that's going to have a direct positive effect on sort of global trade, other things equal. Now, second, lowering rates tends to depreciate the US dollar because sort of what happens is foreign holders of US securities tend to sell those assets and buy higher yielding foreign assets. Now, there weren't big moves today in the currency market because the rate cut was largely expected, but over the long term, dollar weakness tends to make US exports more competitive and other countries' exports less competitive and hurt tourism outside the US. Now, the third thing, US assets, particularly US government securities, are very widely held globally. And these securities are close substitutes for other government bonds. So as US rates fall, that's going to naturally exert some downward pressure on other assets.
I see. And speaking of foreign assets, some Fed members have reportedly raised concerns that Trump's economic policies, like tariffs and a mass immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia, could push inflation back up. What's your take on the economic risks tied to the mass detention of Korean workers?
Yeah, so what happened there was really terrible. It was terrible for the workers affected, terrible for their families, and frankly, terrible for the US-Korean alliance. Even selfishly, from the perspective of an American, it really does undermine US economic interests. So the US would benefit a lot from having that plant operating in Georgia. It would help in terms of jobs, it would help in terms of manufacturing, it would help in terms of technology. And sort of longer term, it undermines the trust that Korea and other allies can place in the US for this and future economic cooperation. So, ultimately, if this impedes investment in manufacturing in the US, reduces international trade and so on, it's going to feed back both this higher inflation and higher unemployment. Really, at the end of the day, it just seems like a sort of senseless loss for both sides. I hope it can be straightened out quickly. A lot of policies that are coming out of the Trump administration really do seem sort of nonsensical, even from purely selfish US economic perspective.
I see. All right, Dr. Pushak, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
After hundreds of South Korean workers were detained in a U.S. immigration raid in Georgia, an official at an economic development organization in the state says discussions are underway to bring back those workers. And a new report from the Congressional Research Service also warns that the incident could strain Seoul-Washington ties. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
An official from a public economic development organization in the U.S. state of Georgia says discussions are underway to bring back South Korean workers who were detained in a U.S. immigration raid earlier this month. Hugh Tollison, president of the Savannah Economic Development Authority, told the Savannah Morning News on Wednesday that it's very important for the workers to return. He explained that they are the only people with the technical skills to install equipment and train employees in battery cell technology at Hyundai Motor Group's joint battery plant with LG Energy Solution. Tollison did not provide details on how the workers' return might be secured. Meanwhile, a new report from the Congressional Research Service warned that the incident could strain U.S.-South Korea relations. The report noted concerns that immigration enforcement could conflict with U.S. efforts to expand domestic manufacturing through foreign investment. It also referenced the pending legislation known as the Partner with Korea Act. The bipartisan bill would provide 15,000 high-skilled visas for Korean nationals, helping to fill gaps in advanced industries like electric vehicles and batteries. Meanwhile, LG Energy Solution says its U.S. battery projects remain on track despite the recent incident. According to the Wall Street Journal, Lee Hyuk-jae, the head of the company's North America division, told reporters at an auto industry event in Detroit that LG is working very hard at all sites to ensure customers are not affected. LG Energy Solution is currently building 4 battery plants in the U.S., including the joint venture with Hyundai in Georgia. More than 310 South Koreans were arrested on September 4th at the Hyundai LG plant construction site in Georgia. U.S. immigration officials say they were working illegally, some on short-term or recreational visas that do not allow employment. They were detained for about a week before being released and returned to South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news, Seoul and Beijing's top diplomats met for the first in-person talk since the start of the Lee Jae-myung administration, discussing North Korea and a potential visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping next month. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
South Korea and China reaffirmed their strategic cooperative partnership as Foreign Minister Cho Hyun met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing in their first face-to-face talks of the Lee Jae-myung administration. According to Seoul's foreign ministry, Cho and Wang met for 3 hours on Wednesday evening local time for talks and dinner at the Diaoitai State Guesthouse. North Korea dominated the discussion. Cho emphasized the need for denuclearization and peace through dialogue and cooperation and urged Beijing to help bring Pyongyang back to dialogue. Wang replied that China would continue to play a constructive role for peace and stability on the peninsula and continue communicating with Seoul. Speaking to the media afterwards, Cho said Wang had provided an explanation regarding North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to China earlier this month. While Beijing made no explicit mention of denuclearization, Cho noted China's policy on the peninsula appears unchanged. This would be reassuring for Seoul, as the North Korea-China summit raised concerns as statements from both sides did not address denuclearization, unlike in their previous 4 summits. Another focus was Chinese President Xi Jinping's possible visit to South Korea for the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju next month.
APEC being held this year in Korea and next year in China carries great significance. We hope President Xi will attend the Gyeongju leaders meeting.
Cho later told reporters he felt it was clear that President Xi intends to visit Korea at the end of October. Upon Cho's invitation, Wang replied that he looked forward to meeting again in Seoul, with October viewed as the likely timeframe. The Korean diplomat's visit to Beijing preceded protocol, as it was actually Wang's turn to visit Seoul first. This appears to signal South Korea's pragmatic diplomacy amid the heightened rivalry between the United States and China. Wang in fact highlighted China's version of multilateralism, signaling Beijing's efforts to offset US leadership.
We hope, together with Korea and the wider international community, to uphold a uncensored international system and to develop the global order in a fairer and more reasonable direction.
Cho explained that while South Korea will continue to strengthen its alliance with Washington, it will also pursue the mature development of Seoul-Beijing relations based on national interest and pragmatism. He also stressed the need to respect mutual concerns, objecting to China's unauthorized structures in the Yellow Sea. Wang replied that consultations are already underway and that the issue will be properly managed. The 2 ministers also discussed shifting economic cooperation from a vertical division of labour to a more horizontal partnership, with the aim of directly benefiting their citizens. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Joseph Yoon says U.S. President Donald Trump will also attend the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju next month and hold talks with President Lee Jae-myung. Speaking at the Korea-U.S. Alliance Conference in Seoul on Wednesday, Yoon said last month's summit between the 2 leaders was a success and confirmed they will meet again at APEC. He emphasized that the alliance remains strong and is growing stronger. He also said that the partnership is focused not only on the Korean peninsula, but also on global peace, prosperity, and security, stressing ongoing efforts to modernize the alliance. South Korea's biggest annual film festival has now kicked off in Busan, and this year it's celebrating its 30th anniversary. Our culture correspondent Park Go-nu was there.
South Korea's southern port city of Busan has heated up, not because of the weather, but as star directors and actors walk the red carpet at the country's largest annual film festival. Among them were the main cast of the festival's opening film No Other Choice, Lee Byung-hun and Son Ye-jin, as well as K-pop Demon Hunters director Maggie Kang and Frankenstein director Guillermo del Toro. 30 years, 30 stories. This year, the Busan International Film Festival is opening its new chapter in its cinematic journey. From its modest beginnings to today's grand stage, 3 decades of film history come alive here in Busan as the world now spotlights Korea's biggest film festival. South Korean star director Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice, which drew global attention after winning the International Audience Award at the Toronto International Film Festival, made its Asian premiere. The actors and director of the film expressed their excitement to finally share their hard work.
As an actor who'd worked on this film for a long time, I found it completely different every time I watched it, finding new details and mise-en-scene that I hadn't noticed before. It's truly a film that needs to be experienced in theaters.
Based on an American novel, the story was recreated in a Korean setting, reflecting themes of home ownership and patriarchy. Through this, the film portrays the limits and follies of the main character, something audiences will relate to.
On opening day, visitors flocked to the venue hours in advance, lining up for merchandise and rushing to reserve their seats.
I'm so excited because a lot of people and me myself, I think the lineup for Busan International Film Festival this year is especially really great. So I'm excited to see.
I've been coming for 5 straight years, but this seems like the biggest crowd so far. With the 30th anniversary, I'm expecting extended programs and richer content this year.
To mark the milestone, BIFF has prepared a range of special programs. One is the inaugural Busan Awards, a competition between 14 Asian movies taking place for the first time in the festival's history. They will be competing in 5 categories, including the Grand Prize and Best Director. This year also places a stronger focus on engaging audiences, with events more relevant to the visitors. A notable highlight will be the very first sing-along premiere of K-pop Demon Hunters in Korea. Altogether, the festival will showcase 241 films from 64 countries, promising global premieres and plenty of special programs to delight film fans worldwide. Park Go-nu, Arirang News, Busan.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. U.S. President Donald Trump has begun his second state visit to the United Kingdom, welcomed with a royal ceremony at Windsor Castle. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump, who arrived in the UK late Tuesday, were formally greeted by King Charles III and Queen Camilla on Wednesday. The Prince and Princess of Wales were also there to welcome the visitors. A royal salute was fired and there was a carriage procession through the Windsor estate, followed by inspection of the Guard of Honor. The ceremonial display included bands from across the British Army branches, national anthems, and a fly past which was scheduled but modified due to weather concerns. A lavish banquet was held at St. George's Hall later in the day, where King Charles said the special relationship between the U.S. and UK has made us safer and stronger through the generations. A multi-billion-dollar U.S. technology investment deal, referred to as the Tech Prosperity Deal, was also announced as Trump's visit got underway. Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer are expected to sign a handful of deals on Thursday and hold a joint news conference. However, the visit also drew protests, with more than 100,000 people gathering in central London to protest Trump's policies. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy announced Wednesday the first U.S. weapons deliveries under a new NATO-led funding program, stating that they will include air defense missiles. Zelenskyy also said Ukraine has already secured weapons funding of over $2 billion through the prioritized Ukraine requirements list, with an additional $3.5 billion coming by October. The new mechanism, coordinated by U.S. and European allies, aims to streamline the delivery of critical U.S.-made weapons. Under the package, Zelenskyy said the initial 2 shipments, each worth $500 million, will definitely include missiles for Patriot air defense systems, along with munitions for high-mobility artillery rocket systems. These are considered key to countering increased Russian strikes, especially as cooler weather approaches and energy infrastructure is most vulnerable. The new initiative helps increase predictability and speed of weapons deliveries through allied funding rather than only direct U.S. spending. The European Commission on Wednesday proposed new plans to restrict trade with Israel and impose sanctions on its extremist ministers in response to the ongoing Gaza war. If adopted, the plans would suspend trade-related provisions of the EU-Israel Association Agreement and would be the EU's toughest response to the war in Gaza. It would also include the reimposition of tariffs on goods currently enjoying zero-duty status, which would affect approximately $6.87 billion of Israeli exports. The EU is Israel's top trading partner, accounting for 32% of its trade in goods in 2024. The proposals require a qualified majority among EU member states and unanimous support for sanctions against individuals. Finally, paleontologists in Peru on Wednesday unveiled the fossilized skeleton of a dolphin-like creature estimated to be between 8 and 12 million years old. The remains were discovered in July in the Ocucaje Desert, an area south of the capital Lima, which was once part of the Pacific Ocean. Scientists say the fossil was exceptionally well preserved, with the coastal mountains shielding the seabed from strong currents, creating calm conditions ideal for marine life, which led to the well-preserved remains. Researchers have noted that the fossil helps them understand past geography and how the coastline has changed over time.
The late summer heat is finally coming to an end for the southern regions today. Those in Daegu and nearby areas will welcome much cooler highs today from yesterday's sizzling heat. And here in Seoul, we'll have highs that are a couple degrees higher than yesterday, but will be hovering right around the seasonal average. The capital regions will stay under mostly cloudy skies, but more rain is in the forecast for the rest of the country. Expect to see 5 to 20 millimeters through the afternoon, except in Jeollado provinces, where rain is expected through late tonight. This afternoon, Seoul will reach 26 degrees, Gwangju, Busan both topping out at 27 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, Gyeongju will also notice much cooler highs. But note that Gyeongsangdo provinces will notice winds picking up as the day goes on. Looking ahead, more rain is expected to fall nationwide from tomorrow afternoon through the weekend, with cooler morning temperatures. Please take care.
Now that is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.